Have you ever wanted to build explosive, fast-twitch athletic power without putting, like, massive career-shortening wear and tear on your joints?
Right, which sounds like a total physical contradiction.
It really does.
Hmm?
I mean, imagine you are tasked with building a rocket engine. You need it to produce an astronomical amount of thrust, but there's a major catch.
Oh, there's always a catch.
Yeah, you have to construct and test this engine without putting any structural stress on the chassis of the ship itself.
Which is wild because in traditional sports science, generating high power output has almost always required high mechanical damage to get there.
Exactly.
Like if you want to get stronger, you just have to lift heavy. You put a barbell on your back, you grind through the reps, and that heavy lifting inevitably takes a toll on your cartilage, your tendons, your ligaments.
But today, we are exploring a cutting-edge, joint-friendly intervention for building fast-twitch muscle strength that, well, it challenges that entire paradigm.
It really flips it on its head.
Yeah. The mission for today's deep dive is to see how manipulating something as simple as blood flow might completely rewrite how we train for explosive speed.
And to guide us, we are looking at a brilliantly designed piece of research.
Right. The article is titled, Effects of Quadriceps Strengthening Exercise with Blood Flow Restriction on Knee Angular Velocity, Strength, and Balance in Fencers.
And it provides some highly specific, functionally relevant data. It was authored by Jong-Su and Won-Seob Shin and published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine in 2026, volume 25, pages 502 to 513.
It is a rigorously structured trial that tackles this exact problem, right? Building power without breaking down the athlete.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to this deep dive into the research. We're going to translate that academic rigor into, concepts you can actually use to understand human performance.
Because that's the goal here.
So to start us off, why fencing? I mean, of all the sports to study for explosive power, football, sprinting, basketball, why did Wu and Shin focus on the fencing lunge? Or, as they call it in the literature, the fenta.
Well, because the fencing lunge represents an absolute perfect storm of biomechanical demands, it requires what we call intense functional asymmetry.
Functional asymmetry, what does that look like on the strip?
Basically, when a fencer lunges forward, their two legs are forced to do completely opposite jobs simultaneously, all in a fraction of a second.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so the rear leg acts as the engine. It generates explosive forward propulsion through concentric contraction. The muscle is actively shortening as it generates force to launch the body across the floor.
So the rear leg is just pure, unadulterated acceleration.
Right. But the front leg has a totally different biological assignment.
It's the brakes, right?
Exactly. The front leg acts as the brakes. It utilizes eccentric contraction, meaning the muscle is actually lengthening while under severe tension to absorb the immense impact of the landing and stabilize the knee joint.
That sounds incredibly taxing.
It is. For both the engine to fire and the brakes to hold, the quadriceps strength on both sides has to be absolutely elite.
If we think about the biomechanics of the fencer, it's essentially a high-performance drag racing car.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so the rear leg is the massive set of rear tires dumping explosive horsepower into the asphalt to launch the car forward off the starting line.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the front leg is the parachute deploying right at the finish line to keep the whole vehicle from crashing into the wall. Both of those mechanisms require immense structural integrity, but for completely different reasons.
That analogy perfectly captures the dual demand, and it highlights where the traditional training problem arises.
Right, because you have to train both.
Historically, to build that kind of bulletproof structural integrity in the quads, athletes have relied on high-load resistance training. We are talking about lifting around 70% of their one repetition maximum. So heavy squats, heavy lunges, heavy leg extensions.
Which, to be fair, does work. Pushing heavy iron builds strength.
It does.
But there is a hidden cost to that, especially for a competitive athlete, right?
A massive mechanical cost. Lifting at 70% of your maximum capacity imposes severe mechanical stress on the joints.
Yeah.
Over a competitive collegiate season, a fencer is already subjecting their body to thousands of high-impact lunges. Constantly adding a heavy mechanical weightlifting load on top of that regular sport-specific training dramatically spikes the risk of overuse injuries.
Because the tissue is just breaking down faster than the body can synthesize new protein to repair it.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the core intervention in this study. Enter blood flow restriction, or BFR, training. This is where the researchers attempted to bypass the heavy weights entirely while still triggering the muscle to grow.
And what's fascinating here is how BFR essentially tricks the body into thinking it's lifting heavy weights by trapping metabolites in the muscle.
Trick the body. How does that work?
The mechanism is brilliant. BFR uses an external pneumatic cuff, very similar to like a medical blood pressure cuff, to apply targeted pressure to the upper thigh. This pressure is calibrated to restrict the venous blood flow out of the muscle while still allowing the arterial blood in.
Wait, so the brain thinks, I am pushing a massive amount of weight, but you're actually barely lifting anything. How does temporarily pulling blood in the leg trigger that kind of neurological panic?
It comes down to cellular survival. By trapping the blood in the leg, the BFR cuff creates a localized hypoxic environment.
Hypoxic meaning low oxygen.
Right. The muscle is starved of oxygen. Normally, when you lift light weights, your body relies on slow-twitch muscle fibers because they are highly efficient and they use oxygen to keep working for long periods. But in a hypoxic environment, that oxygen isn't there. The slow-twitch fibers exhaust almost immediately.
Leaving the body with no choice but to call in the heavy artillery?
You're hitting on the biological mechanism exactly. To keep the leg moving, the central nervous system is forced to recruit the large, fast-twitch muscle fibers.
Explosive ones.
Right. Those are the massive, powerful fibers responsible for explosive speed, and they don't rely on oxygen to function. The body deploys them much earlier than it normally would, all because of the metabolic stress of the blood pooling.
That is wild.
And it accomplishes this using incredibly low loads. We are talking about lifting just 30% of your one repetition maximum.
30%. So instead of loading 100 pounds onto the machine and grinding your knee cartilage, you are lifting 30 pounds.
Exactly.
But your body reacts hormonally and neurologically as if you were lifting a house. That is a wild biohack.
It really is.
But theory is one thing. To prove this actually works safely, I mean, you can't just slap a tourniquet on someone and hope for the best.
No, absolutely not.
Who did they test this on, and how did they set up the duel between traditional heavy lifting and this new BFR method?
Well, the researchers recruited 16 collegiate saber and EP fencers, ultimately using pristine data from 14 of them for the final analysis.
Elite athletes, then.
Yeah, they divided these athletes into two groups for a 6-week intervention, having them train 3 times a week.
I imagine the workouts looked vastly different.
Night and day. The BFR group performed leg extensions at that light 30% load.
Okay.
They did one long set of 30 repetitions to really deplete the oxygen, followed by 3 more sets of 15 reps with just 30 seconds of rest between sets.
That sounds intense, even with lightweight.
Oh, it is. And the crucial detail, the BFR cuffs remained inflated the entire time, even during the rest periods, to maintain that hypoxic stress.
Okay, wait, before we even talk about the other group, I have to push back hard on this protocol.
Sure.
Wrapping a cuff around a collegiate athlete's leg and intentionally cutting off circulation while they exercise, doesn't that risk deep vein thrombosis or severe vascular damage? I mean, for you listening, the idea of tying a band around your leg while doing leg extensions sounds inherently dangerous.
It is a very valid concern, and it's why BFR shouldn't be done with, like, random elastic bands from a gym bag. Yep. The researchers were meticulous about the safety parameters. They utilized the Eddie G restriction system cuffs, and the pressure wasn't just a guessing game.
How do they measure it?
It was set precisely to 130% of each individual athlete's resting systolic blood pressure.
Okay, meaning it scales to the person's unique cardiovascular baseline. It's not just a one-size-fits-all tourniquet.
Right. And the physics of that 130% pressure threshold are vital to understand. It safely restricts the low-pressure venous return, which is the used blood trying to go back up to the heart. But that pressure is absolutely not high enough to stop the high-pressure arterial blood from forcefully entering the limb from the heart.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the limb is never starved of fresh blood. The used blood is just temporarily bottlenecked to build up the metabolic stress. The researchers monitored them closely and reported 0 adverse events during the entire 6-week study.
Okay, that clarifies a lot. Blood is going in, it's just struggling to get out. It's safe restriction, not a total blockade. So that's the BFR group doing lightweight with cuffs. What was the heavy lifting group doing?
The General Leg Extension Group, or GLE, went through a traditional high-load protocol. They trained at 70% of their 1RM, grinding out 4 sets of 12 reps, also with 30 seconds of rest, but without any cuffs.
Just heavy mechanical stress on the muscle.
Exactly.
So we have our 2 groups, one lifting feathers under metabolic stress, the other lifting heavy iron under mechanical stress.
Yeah.
Now, measuring the strength gains is easy enough, But how did Wu and Shin capture the actual speed and kinematics of the fencing lunge? Because the fente happens in the blink of an eye. You can't just film that on a smartphone.
Measuring elite athletic kinematics is notoriously difficult. Traditionally, biomechanical studies use optical motion capture.
Like the CGI suits.
Yeah, exactly. Those setups you see in movie studios with expensive infrared cameras and athletes wearing suits covered in little reflective spheres. They are incredibly accurate, but they require a dedicated, sterile, million-dollar laboratory environment.
And you can't exactly drag a collegiate fencing team into an animation studio every week to test their lunge.
No, you need a real-world setting. So to capture the high angular velocities on the actual fencing strip, the researchers bypassed the cameras entirely.
What do they use instead?
They utilized 7 wearable inertial measurement unit sensors, or IMUs. They securely strapped these tiny sensors to the fencer's feet, shins, thighs, and sacrum.
Like strapping a network of ultra-high-tech smartwatches all over their lower body.
Effectively, yes. And the key to these IMUs is their sampling rate. They recorded data at 100 hertz.
Meaning 100 times a second.
Exactly. That means they were logging the exact angle, rotation, and velocity of every joint 100 times every single second. This high frequency turns the human leg into a stream of real-time geometric data. It is absolutely necessary because if you used a standard 30 frames per second video camera, the peak velocity of the fencer's snap forward literally happens between the frames.
Oh, you would just miss the data entirely.
You'd miss it completely. They also used a handheld dynamometer to test raw isometric quadriceps strength and a Wii balance board to test static single-leg balance.
Okay, we have the setup dialed in, 14 elite fencers, streaming thousands of data points per second, testing a 30% load with blood flow restriction against a 70% heavy lifting protocol. Let's get into the results after 6 weeks. Did lifting light weights actually make them faster?
Well, the researchers broke the fencing lunge down into 3 distinct phases to isolate exactly where the movement changed. Phase 1 is preparation, Phase 2 is propulsion, and Phase 3 is landing.
Okay.
Across the board, the BFR group showed medium to large statistical improvements in rear leg kinematics during all phases.
Which means the engine of the lunge, the leg doing the driving, got a massive upgrade from lifting just 30% of their max weight.
A verifiable upgrade. In Phase 2, the propulsion phase, the IMU data showed the BFR group significantly increased their front leg knee flexion angle.
What does that mean in plain English?
To translate that out of the data and onto the strip, it means the athletes were able to achieve a deeper, more optimal preparatory bend, compressing the spring further just as they launched forward.
And what about Phase 3? The landing phase, when the parachute deploys and the front leg has to absorb all that violent kinetic energy.
This is actually where BFR showed the largest effect size of the entire study.
Really?
Yeah, it manifested in the rear leg hip flexion angle. When a fencer lands, they can't just freeze, right? They have to rapidly retract that rear leg to decelerate their body mass and instantly regain a stable defensive stance.
Oh, right.
The BFR group demonstrated a substantial improvement in this rapid flexion control. They could snap that back leg into position much faster, making their deceleration incredibly efficient.
That is undeniably impressive kinematic improvement without ever touching heavyweights.
It really is.
But what about raw isometric strength? Did the BFR group actually build more muscle force, or did they just get better at the movement?
They absolutely built force. Both groups got stronger in their rear leg, the engine block. The low-load BFR group gained an impressive average of 10.76 kilograms of raw isometric quad strength.
Wow. And the heavy lifters.
The heavy lifting group, doing 70% of their max, gained 8.00 kilograms. So both protocols successfully built the primary driving force of the lunge.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, though. What happened to the front leg? The braking leg that takes all the physical abuse during a match.
The data for the front leg is the defining twist of the study.
Oh, yeah?
The low-load BFR group gained over 3 kilograms of strength in their front leg. They continued to improve.
Okay, so the BFR group got stronger in both legs.
Yes. But the heavy lifting GLE group, the athletes grinding through heavy reps for 6 weeks, actually lost an average of 4.30 kilograms of strength in their front leg.
Wait. The group lifting 70% of their absolute maximum weight, sweating it out, pushing their muscles to the limit, actually got demonstrably weaker in their stabilizing leg.
They did.
That is wild. It's like studying for a massive final exam by pulling 3 all-nighters in a row.
Right?
You put in maximum effort, you drink all the coffee, but you show up to the test completely burnt out. Your brain is fried, and you actually score worse than if you just got some sleep.
That is a remarkably accurate way to conceptualize the biology at play here. In sports science, we formally call this phenomenon non-functional overreaching.
Non-functional
Yeah,
overreaching.
yeah. You have to remember the context of these subjects. These are active collegiate athletes in the middle of their competitive season. They are already fencing for hours a day.
So they're already tired.
Exactly. The front leg in fencing takes a brutal, repetitive beating from constantly absorbing the eccentric impact of those lunges.
Right, the chassis is already vibrating violently from the parachute, deploying 100 times a practice.
Exactly. When you take an athlete whose front leg is already experiencing high levels of microtrauma and peripheral fatigue from their sport, and you add a heavy mechanical load like 70% 1RM leg extensions, you simply exceed their body's capacity to recover.
It's just too much damage.
Right. The central nervous system is taxed, and the muscle tissue is breaking down faster than protein synthesis can rebuild it. That is non-functional overreaching. The heavy lifting was literally too much stress. It made them weaker.
And the BFR group was completely shielded from that overtraining effect.
Because the BFR group was only lifting 30% of their max, the mechanical friction on the knee joint and the sheer pairing of the muscle fibers was minimal. They achieved the metabolic stress necessary to trigger muscle growth and fast twitch adaptation without adding destructive structural damage to a leg that was already working overtime on the fencing strip.
Wait, so by intentionally starving the muscle of oxygen with light weights, you're tricking the brain into hitting the panic button and deploying the explosive fast-twitch fibers, all while sparing the joints.
That's the beauty of it.
That is a brilliant physiological hack. You get the power gains without the central nervous system burnout or the joint degradation.
Absolutely.
Now, there was one final variable Wu and Shin tested, and that was balance. They used a Wii balance board to measure static stability. Did the BFR group become more stable on one leg?
Interestingly enough, the data showed a null result there. There were no meaningful changes in static balance for either the BFR group or the traditional heavy lifting group.
So why the discrepancy? I mean, if their legs are vastly stronger and faster, shouldn't their balance improve? Did the BFR protocol fail in this specific metric?
It didn't fail so much as the testing parameters didn't align with the biological adaptations.
No, so.
The researchers outlined 3 very clear, logical reasons why balance didn't improve. First, the intervention utilized leg extensions. A seated leg extension is an open kinetic chain exercise.
Open kinetic chain, what does that mean?
That means your foot is moving freely in the air against resistance. But balance requires closed kinetic chain proficiency, like your foot being planted firmly on the ground.
Okay.
A closed chain environment forces the body to constantly adjust its spatial awareness, which we call proprioception. Open chain leg extensions simply don't train proprioception effectively.
That makes intuitive sense. You aren't teaching the foot how to talk to the brain while it's floating in the air. What's the second reason?
Second, the biological target of BFR is very specific. We established that BFR creates a hypoxic environment that forcefully recruits fast-twitch muscle fibers.
Right, the big explosive ones.
Exactly. But when you are standing perfectly still, trying to maintain static balance on one leg on a board, your body isn't calling on explosive fast-twitch fibers. It relies heavily on the highly enduring slow-twitch fibers to make tiny, sustained micropostural adjustments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. By its very design, BFR bypassed the specific muscle fibers needed to ace that specific static test.
That is a fantastic biological nuance. The tool built a better hammer, but the test required a scalpel. And the third reason.
The third reason is purely statistical, but incredibly common in elite sports research. These are collegiate fencers. They spend hours every single day balancing asymmetrically on a narrow metallic strip while someone tries to hit them.
Sure.
They already possess an elite level of baseline stability. The researchers suggest they hit a ceiling effect. When a subject is already performing in the 99th percentile of a specific physical skill, finding a statistically measurable improvement in a short 6-week window is incredibly difficult.
Right. If you take a genius-level mathematician and give them a basic algebra tutor for 6 weeks, their test scores aren't going to go up.
They're already scoring 100.
Exactly. The test itself isn't sensitive enough to measure any minute improvements they might have made in their mental math.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the implications of these findings extend far beyond the collegiate fencing strip. What Wu and Shin demonstrated is that low-load blood flow restriction training provides a highly effective, genuinely joint-friendly alternative to heavy lifting that bypasses mechanical damage.
It's the rocket engine without the chassis stress.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who might never pick up a saber in your life?
Well, it means we have a viable tool to rethink rehabilitation and longevity.
Like for regular folks.
Yeah, and for athletes. For a competitive athlete, it means you can maintain or even build explosive kinematic power during a grueling competitive season when your joints are already taxed to the limit.
That's huge for in-season training.
But think about the everyday clinical applications. If you are recovering from an ACL reconstruction surgery and your knee cannot handle heavy squats, or you are dealing with osteoarthritis, or you are an aging individual whose spine can't safely load a heavy barbell anymore, this research suggests you are not locked out of building fast twitch muscle.
You just had to change the stimulus.
Right, you can still achieve significant strength and speed adaptations by lifting very light, comfortable weights, so long as you restrict the venous blood flow to create that metabolic trigger.
That is a profound paradigm shift for physical therapy and fitness. So to summarize the mission we set out on today, the research clearly showed that BFR training successfully delivered comparable, and in the case of the front leg strength and lunge kinematics, definitively superior results to traditional high-load training.
And it did it all without the mechanical toll.
Yeah, the heavy lifters literally got weaker in their stabilizing leg due to non-functional overreaching, while the BFR group got faster, stronger, and significantly more efficient in their complex athletic movements.
And they achieved all of those physiological upgrades while lifting just 30% of their maximum capacity. It fundamentally challenges what we assume about the necessary prerequisites for building human strength.
I highly encourage you, the listener, to go read the full article by Wu and Shin. Seeing the exact statistical breakdowns and looking at the IMU kinematic graphs for the 3 lunge phases really brings the data to life in a way audio alone cannot.
It is an accessible, fascinating read.
Also, make sure you follow the channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss our future deep dives into cutting-edge sports science and human performance, just like this one.
The underlying mechanisms we explored today really invite us to question the perceived limits of the human body and, how much of our traditional training methodology is based on mechanical habit rather than metabolic efficiency.
Which leaves us with a lingering, provocative thought for you to ponder. If simply manipulating blood flow and local oxygen levels can trick our nervous system into explosive, fast-twitch muscle growth using extremely light weights, what other physical limitations are just illusions created by our cardiovascular system?
That's a great question.
Right. Could BFR and similar metabolic hacks eventually be the key to extending peak athletic careers by a decade or more? Imagine a future where athletes don't have to retire in their early 30s simply because their joints are shattered. A future where they figured out how to build the ultimate drag race engine without ever putting a single stress fracture on the chassis.